He's a man of very complicated man, and he doesn't like doing interviews or anything, and there is a certain aura or myth around him. He's the most extraordinary man, most extraordinary.
And I just remember thinking, this guy's kind of a magical, wonderful guy.
Stanley wanted us to see his movies absolutely as he envisioned them.
You know, I shared 3 years of my life with this man, and
I never like to say anything about myself because I think that the pleasure that an audience receives in discovering things for themselves.
Stanley Kubrick was born in Manhattan on July 26, 1928, the first of 2 children born to his parents, Sadie and Jacob. His sister Barbara was born 6 years later, in May 1934. Stanley's father was a doctor who had a keen interest in chess and photography, a passion he passed on to his son from an early age. And Stanley, who became a talented chess player, credited the game with giving him patience and discipline in making decisions. Stanley spent his childhood living in the Bronx, and despite his Jewish heritage, did not have a religious upbringing, and would later declare he had an atheistic view of the universe. He was of above average intelligence, but his attendance at school was atrocious, and he often missed as many days schooling as he attended, spending his days watching films. He also had a keen interest in photography, and encouraged by his father, who bought him his first camera, he sold his first photograph to Look magazine at the age of just 16. The shot was of a dejected newspaper vendor displaying headlines announcing the death of US President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Possibly spurred on by the sale, Stanley aborted his studies at the City College of New York at the age of 17, and became an apprentice photographer for Look magazine, and was later taken on full-time. He supplemented his income during this period by playing chess at various Manhattan chess clubs. Stanley quickly became known for his storytelling in photographs, often reflecting his own emotions and childhood memories, usually in ordinary but contemplative images. Stanley also had a passion for jazz music and was regularly assigned to photograph numerous high-profile jazz musicians, including Frank Sinatra. This gave him an insight into the showbiz world that he later grew to detest. In May 1948, Stanley married his first wife, childhood sweetheart, Tob Metz, and they lived in a small apartment just north of Greenwich Village. During this time, Kubrick began attending film screenings at the Museum of Modern Art and the cinemas of New York City, and he became fascinated by the complex, fluid camera work of the director Max Ophüls, whose style greatly influenced him in the films he made. He was also in awe of director Elia Kazan, whom he later described as America's best director, who could perform miracles with his actors. These visits and influences prompted an obsession with the art of filmmaking, and led to Stanley making his first short film, a documentary about boxer Walter Cartier. The 16-minute black and white film that featured a unique backtracking shot was remarkably accomplished for a first film, and set the scene for Stanley's characteristic camera movements in his movies. The film was sold to RKO Pather for $4,000, and on the back of this success, Stanley quit his job at Look to concentrate on mastering his trade as a filmmaker. Stanley went on to make a further 3 short documentaries before making his first feature film in 1953, an anti-war film called Fear and Desire. This was followed by The Killer's Kiss in 1955, The Killing in 1956, and Paths of Glory starring Kirk Douglas in 1957. But perhaps his biggest and most high-profile early break came in 1960 at the age of just 30, when director Anthony Mann was sacked for the filming of Spartacus, and Kirk Douglas, whose company Briner Productions was producing the film, brought in Stanley to take over the direction. However, despite the film winning 4 Academy Awards at the time, and at the time being the biggest moneymaker in Universal Studios history, filming was troublesome for Stanley. He was used to having complete artistic control, and his precise nature and unique camera work caused disagreements with his cinematographer Russell Metty and Kirk Douglas, resulting in many disputes on set. And despite its huge success, Stanley disowned Spartacus and never again made a film where he did not have complete control. After Spartacus, many people believe things changed for Stanley. During the filming of the movie, he was based in Los Angeles, where he was exposed to things that deeply disturbed him, things that will be the premise of this documentary. He became aware of the seedier side of the film industry, and it has been suggested this included paedophile rings, CIA mind control, and a breakaway Illuminati society that he was possibly a member of. And in the films that followed Spartacus, he littered them with hidden messages and references to try and cryptically expose what he knew. In this documentary, we want to look at some of these messages and the meanings behind them. However, because there are so many, we are just going to concentrate on 5 of his films and look at some of the theories behind the cryptic and not so cryptic clues he left behind, discussing The Shining, the Apollo 11 moon landing conspiracy, and of course Eyed Wide Shut and Stanley's death. But as always, we will leave it up to you to decide if there is any truth in any of these claims. The messages seem to subtly start 2 years after Spartacus in Stanley's next film, Lolita. Lolita was a controversial film based on the equally controversial novel written by Vladimir Nabokov, and in brief, it follows the story of Humbert Humbert, a middle-aged college lecturer who has a sexual obsession with a 12-year-old girl named Dolores, aka Lolita. He goes on to marry the girl's mother to get close to her, and when this new wife realizes what's going on, after reading his diary, she meets an untimely death in a car accident, leaving him free to seduce the object of his desire. Humbert then travels across the US with Lolita, posing as her father, and eventually seduces her in a hotel. The pair then return to their lives while continuing their relationship, but Lolita soon catches the eye of another older man, this time a playwright called Claire Quilty, who is the writer of a school play she is starring in. But when Humbert becomes jealous of Lolita's involvement in the play, he takes her on the road again. Unbeknown to them, they are being stalked by Claire, who later kidnaps Lolita. Lolita then discovers Claire also had a fling with her mother, and after he promises her a glamorous life, she also starts a sexual relationship with him, although she soon finds that it's a trap to use her in his depraved fantasy films. Years later, Humbert receives a letter from Lolita asking for money. She is now married and pregnant, and after meeting her, Humbert is no longer attracted to the now roundly expectant mother with glasses, although he still offers her money to come away with him. He also demands to know who kidnapped her all those years ago, and when she tells him, he hunts down Claire. The film ends, as it begins, with him tracking down and shooting the playwright. Throughout the film, Kubrick adds humour to a very serious subject. After all, in effect, the film and the book are about paedophiles. There are also subtle differences in the movie that do not appear in the book. The first time Humbert seduces Lolita before revealing her mother is dead is in a hotel that is overflowing with police officers attending a convention. Conspiracy theorists believe this was a deliberate reference to the growing corruption and paedophile cover-ups within law enforcement agencies. Another difference in the film is when Humbert, his wife, and Lolita are at a drive-in horror movie, and Lolita grabs Humbert's hand and he holds her hand rather than his wife's. The scene on screen at this moment is from Christopher Lee's The Curse of Frankenstein, when the monster removes his mask. This is suggesting that Humbert is a monster in a mask, as are many other members of the film industry. Many also believe Kubrick chose the subject of the film as a way of telling the world about the murky world of paedophilia within the film industry, and it seems he could have been right, as today more than ever, paedophilia has moved from the murky depths of society to the forefront of our moral awareness, and we now know that it happens, and happened much more often than anyone could have ever imagined in all areas of society. This next conspiracy theory is bizarre, but fascinating, and was first proposed by Jay Weidner, a renowned filmmaker and author. His theory starts with Stanley's 1964 film, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Loved the Bomb, more commonly known as Dr. Strangelove. This film, he believes, started a chain of events that led to the outlandish claims that Stanley Kubrick was responsible for faking the moon landing footage. Let's start with the film. Dr. Strangelove is a black comedy about nuclear weapons that suggests that a mentally insane US general could order a nuclear strike on the Soviet Union without consulting the president. The comedic plot follows the US president and his advisors as they try to stop the attempt and recall the bombers to prevent a nuclear apocalypse. Although the entire film is played for laughs, it seems the detail and the premise of the plot, however crazy it seemed, caught the attention of both the authorities and the public, as after it was released, some described the film as dangerous and compared it to Soviet propaganda. Maybe they realized that Kubrick had done his research and there was an element of truth in the bizarre plot, and unbeknown to the public in 1964, there was nothing in place that could prevent a rogue US bomber or missile crew from deploying their weapons against the Soviets. In fact, it wasn't until the early 1970s that coded switches to prevent the unauthorized use of nuclear weapons were added to the control systems of American missiles and bombers. This meant if the United States went to war, it would require 2 people each with a separate code to unlock a nuclear weapon. Thankfully, today things are a little more sophisticated when it comes to nuclear weapons. So was Stanley trying to warn the public of the fragility of the security surrounding nuclear defense? Possibly. After all, Dr. Strangelove provided a far more accurate description to the public of the dangers of the nuclear command and control systems in 1964 than they ever learned from the White House, the Pentagon, or the media. It's also worth noting that the plot for Dr. Strangelove was loosely based on the 1958 novel Red Alert, a much more serious account of the threat of a nuclear apocalypse, and how easy it could be triggered. Interestingly, a book that the Pentagon had distributed to staff as a cautionary tale about what could go wrong. Another strange twist regarding the film, that its first test screening was supposed to be on November 22nd, 1963, the day JFK was assassinated. However, because of the assassination, the film's release was delayed until late January 1964. And when it was finally released, a couple of the scenes had to be cut. The line, "A fella could have done a pretty good weekend in Dallas with all that stuff," was dubbed to change Dallas to Vegas, and another scene featuring a pie fight was also cut after a participant takes a pie to the face, and one of the generals declares, "Gentlemen, our gallant young president has been struck down in his prime." Let's unpack some of the wilder theories. He claims that during the making of Dr. Strangelove, the Pentagon read the script as Kubrick had asked for their help with the specifications of the B-52 bomber planes that he wanted to feature in the film. But after reading the text, the Pentagon refused to help, believing he was ridiculing them. So Stanley was forced to create the inside and outside of the B-52 bombers without any technical assistance from anybody. He used pictures taken from the Aviation Weekly magazine and sat down with his art director and carefully recreated the inside of the aircraft. Allegedly near the end of shooting, Pentagon officials asked to pay a visit to the set, and when they saw the accuracy of Stanley's recreation of the interior of the plane, they could not believe their eyes. After the film was released and their military saw the full extent of his recreations of both the inside and outside of the B-52, they were blown away, giving them an idea. However, to understand the significance of the theory, we need to rewind to 1961, when NASA had been given orders by JFK that they were to get to the moon before the 60s were out. But it soon became clear that by the beginning of 1964, they could not do this without conventional rocket technology. It's worth pointing out there is also an alternative theory about Kennedy's orders that goes like this. Kennedy had been aware that during World War II, Hitler had a secret Nazi base where he had scientists working on higher dimensional physics, and they had already discovered anti-gravity, and after the war, these scientists were utilized by the US and the Russians and split between the two countries. Allegedly, Kennedy wanted the technology released and tried to force NASA's hand into releasing it by giving orders that he wanted to get to the moon by the end of the 60s. Knowing the only way he could do that would be to release the technology he knew they had. It would also mean that we wouldn't need nuclear reactors because it was free energy. But NASA didn't want to release the technology, and knowing with standard rocketry they could not get to the moon, they had to come up with something else. Enter Stanley Kubrick. It's proposed that in 1963, shortly after Kennedy had been assassinated, the Pentagon watched Dr. Strangelove and saw an opportunity that meant they would not have to release the technology, but could still make it look as if a man had landed on the moon. And with Kennedy conventionally now out of the picture, they hired Stanley Kubrick to fake it. From a technical point of view, he was the most advanced filmmaker in the world, so they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. An offer that if he had refused, probably would have cost him his life. So Stanley set about devising a ruse in the form of a science fiction film called Voyage to the Stars with Arthur C. Clarke, and he used the making of this film, which later became 2001: A Space Odyssey, to act as a cover for the shooting of the Apollo imagery. Stanley used front screen projection, which he was a master of, for both the ape scenes in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and to fake the Apollo landings. Those that believe this theory claim that if you watch the footage of the Apollo 11 moon landings, it's crude and obviously a set, and his second attempt with Apollo 12 must have gone wrong, and was explained away by claiming one of the astronauts accidentally damaged the camera by pointing it at the sun. Apollo 13 allegedly got into trouble and couldn't land on the moon, but by Apollo 14, 15 and 16, Stanley's technique was improving, and by 17 it was very convincing. As well as using front screen projection and many other techniques, he made gigantic inflatables of the lunar landscape to place on a set behind the actors. Supposedly, 2001: A Space Odyssey and the moon landings took 4 years to make, and both the movie and the lunar landings were shot in 70mm, although the Apollo landings were later reduced down to the poor quality videotape we are all familiar with today, and NASA had conveniently erased the original footage so it can never be fully examined. Now all this does sound far-fetched, although equally quite plausible, and Weidner believes that Stanley was racked with guilt, and over the next few decades made subtle references to the fake moon landings in his movies, most notably in The Shining, which we'll discuss later, and he believes part of the plot that deviates from the Stephen King book is Stanley alluding to the deceit of making the Apollo footage, and having to keep it a secret from those closest to him, including his wife at the time. He also believes that in the Hollywood upper circles, many people know about Kubrick's part in the Apollo footage, including Steven Spielberg, and if you look closely at several other films, there are also references to the incident, most notably in Wag the Dog, in which Dustin Hoffman plays a Hollywood producer named Stanley, who is hired by the CIA to fake an incident, and more recently in Toy Story with the introduction of Buzz Lightyear, a toy astronaut who believes he is a hero, but after watching the TV one day and seeing an advert for himself, he realizes he is not a hero or an astronaut, and is a fraud. The house he is in is also the exact same carpet that Danny is sitting on in The Shining. However, if this incredible claim was true, it begs the question, what about the astronauts that allegedly did land on the moon? Well, Weidner believes they have been brainwashed or possibly hypnotized, so that whenever they are asked about the moon landings in interviews, they feel nauseous. He also believes Buzz Aldrin was trying to reveal the truth in his autobiography, Return to Earth, when he talks about how on the 1-year anniversary of the Apollo landing, he was at a Vegas news conference, and the reporters were asking questions about the Apollo landings. One of the reporters looked him in the eyes and said, "Come on, Buzz, tell us what really happened on the moon." Buzz said his head began spinning, he was feeling nauseated, wanted to be sick, and went in the alley and vomited, then shook for an hour and a half after. Obviously, he could never admit he didn't go to the moon, and neither could Neil Armstrong, who came back to the US after the mission as a hero, and the world was his oyster. He could have been a senator, a congressman, or even president. He was a good-looking, well-spoken, and adored by the public, but what did he do? He went back to his ranch in Ohio, and only did 2 interviews for the rest of his life. and never answered any questions about the Apollo landings. And one of the things that backs this theory up can be seen at the press conference right after the Apollo astronauts landed on Earth. They are all sitting there in the press conference looking as if someone had died. They certainly didn't look like three guys who had just got back from one of the most monumentous missions ever. Many say they looked depressed, scared people who really weren't comfortable lying. Now, we are by no means saying man did not go to the moon. We are just giving information on the theories out there that suggested that all was not what it seemed. Let's look at The Shining, a film that without doubt has sprouted the most conspiracy theories ever about a movie. And it's riddled with plots, subplots, mysteries and suggestions that have generated a whole community dedicated to trying to unpick exactly what Kubrick was trying to portray during the film. The film was released in 1980 and is based, although largely contradicts, Stephen King's book of the same name. An example of this can be seen right at the start of the film, when a yellow Volkswagen Beetle is seen cruising up the mountainside. Why yellow, when in the book it clearly states the Volkswagen is red? The location also seems strange. The Overlook Hotel in the film was actually shot at the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, and most of the interior shots were filmed on a set in Britain. It's not known why Kubrick did not use the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, the actual place that Stephen King got the inspiration from to write the book. During the film, there are several shots of Native American architecture, and the hotel itself is scattered with Native American decor, and the plotline implies the hotel is built on an Indian burial ground. Stanley makes subtle references to this during the film, allegedly to hint that the early American settlers exploited and killed Native Americans en masse. It's also noted that there is an excessive amount of red, white and blue in the film, and nearly all the main characters are dressed in red, white or blue. The character Stuart Ullman, who looks eerily like JFK, has an American flag on his desks, with a bald eagle in the background, and he is also dressed in a red, white and blue suit. Many think this is a deliberate reference to the USA, and conspiracy theorists go one step further, believing this is a reference to the fake moon landings. This is reinforced when Wendy is in the kitchen, and on the refrigerator there appears to be a shuttle or rocket stuck to it. Throughout the film, Danny wears clothes in a combination of red, white and blue, and on his jumper there are stars that look like pentagrams found in the occult. He also has a teddy bear that has featured in other Kubrick films, and some believe it's symbolic of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In one of the first scenes, after Jack arrives at the hotel, he's looking at a Playgirl magazine, and if you zoom in on the cover, that particular edition features incest and sleeping with children. In one of the scenes featuring Danny in the hotel room, the Union flag is displayed upside down. And when Jack enters the room, he asks Danny if he's got tired of bombing the universe. This seems out of context for a little boy throwing darts. Was this a backhanded stab at the US's stance on bombing and Stanley's anti-war stance? Also in the day room, when Danny first meets the twin girls, there is a poster on the wall that says Monarch. It is proposed that this is a reference to the CIA-funded mind control program called MK-Ultra, which had several sub-programs, one of which was MK Monarch, which among other things was a study about the genetic passing of information between sibling twins. In the scenes where the Torrances are being shown around the hotel, it's been noted that there is an abundance of ladders that are completely out of context. It's been suggested that this is another reference to the Apollo 11 moon landings, as NASA has its roots in Freemasonry, and ladders in Freemasonry are symbolic of progression from the lower ranks of the movements to the upper echelons of the society. The typewriter used in Stephen King's novel was an Underwood. However, in the film, Stanley has used a German Adler typewriter. Adler translated means eagle. Now this one's a long shot, but some speculate this was a reference to the Holocaust. As we know, Stanley was Jewish, and his wife Christina, and his third wife, was the niece of a leading propaganda director, Veit Harlan. The eagle is also shown on a t-shirt Jack is wearing in the film, with the word Stovington written on it, a clever reference to the book, as that was the name of the school Jack taught in before his trip to the hotel. It's also seemingly no accident that the number 42 pops up throughout the film, as the Nazi final solution began in 1942. It appears on a t-shirt. It is the number of times Wendy swings the bat at Jack, and Danny says red rum 42 times to his mother when he is trying to wake her up. And when Danny and Wendy are watching TV, the film they are watching is Summer of 42. In the book, the room number was 217 and was significant, and previously inhabited Lorraine Massey, a guest who seduced young bellboys and entertained them in her room. In the film, Stanley has changed the room number to 237. The reason for this was rumoured to be so people visiting the real Stanley Hotel wouldn't be afraid to stay in room 217. However, there are other theories on the change, and it links into the fake moon landings we'll discuss later, as the moon is 237,000 miles away from Earth. Another theory is, if you multiply 2 times 3 times 7, it equals 42, the number previously mentioned that appears throughout the film. As well as their possible links to MK Monarch, it's widely known that the twins in the films were inspired by the photographs of the Arbus twins taken by freak photographer Diane Arbus. And if you put the photos side by side, you will see one is smiling and one is sad, exactly the same as the original photograph, but opposite ways around. Few have noticed this subtle detail, and what could it mean? It's been claimed that throughout the film, there are hints that Danny has been sexually abused, possibly by his father Jack. His behaviour is synonymous with suffering from dissociative identity disorder, a common condition suffered by children who have been sexually abused from a young age. The same condition could also be linked to mind control, possibly another reference to MK Ultra and Project Monarch, and it is possible that the material Wendy is reading at the start of the film that can be seen on the coffee table refers to the fact that she knows her son is being abused. The title is Illness is a Metaphor, a classic book that explores denial and stereotyping surrounding illness and treatment for cancer. When Danny is playing on the bright red patterned carpet in the hallway, he suddenly stands up and launches his toys into space, travelling down the hall with it to room 237. The carpet pattern is no coincidence, it represents the Apollo 11 launch pad. When Jack is typing the same phrase on his typewriter over and over, the phrase starts with all, possibly short for Apollo 11. When Jack is seduced by a woman in room 237, it's not until he sees the back of her in the mirror that he realises all is not what it seems. The final scenes of the film imply that Jack has always been the manager of the hotel, showing a photo of him in the ballroom back in 1921. The pose he is taking in the photo is the stance of bafflement, a known occult posse, the same pose George Washington has in his statue in DC. Now, it's entirely possible that all of this is just a coincidence, but if you watch the films, you'll find so much more in them. It's hard to dismiss, and you soon realise there is a deeper meaning to the film that Kubrick has cleverly and cryptically weaved into the scenes, from the start through to the end. Eyes Wide Shut was Stanley's last film, released in 1999. It's an erotic drama starring real-life married couple at the time, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. The story is based on Arthur Schnitzler's 1926 short novel Dream Story, but is set in 1990s New York instead of early 20th century Vienna, and revolves around a wealthy married couple who struggle with their sexuality, monogamy, and reality, which leads the husband to embark on a night-long venture, during which he infiltrates a massive masked orgy of an unnamed secret society. The premise of the film seems to follow a similar path to Stanley's previous films, with veiled references and allusions to secret societies and cult practices within the US hierarchy and film industry. Stanley reportedly worked on the film's script for 30 years, and considered it to be his best work to date. But he died 6 days after showing Warner Brothers his final cut, and when the film was finally released, Warner Brothers had digitally altered some of the scenes, allegedly to secure an R rating. However, there are those who believe Kubrick's death was a little too convenient, and that Eyes Wide Shut was a step too far. Did Kubrick reveal too much, and ultimately pay the price for it? A lot is revealed in the very first scene, when Alice drops her dress in front of the window. She is standing behind two sets of pillars, which some say are symbolic of Boaz and Yachin, the pillars at the entrance to Solomon's temple, and seen in Freemasons' temples. Throughout the film, there are many other references to Freemasons. In particular, at a party the couple are invited to hosted by Bill's friend, the ultra-rich Victor Ziegler. As soon as they enter the house, a checkered patterned floor can be seen, a design that is typically used in Freemason temples. The name Ziegler is also significant. It's a German name meaning bricklayer, and also has links to Freemasonry and Kabbalah. Also, one of the guests at the party has blue forget-me-not flowers in his lapel, a flower that is a well-known symbol in Germany as a message not to forget the poor and despairing. It was also originally used by Masons as a means of recognition, and in modern Masonry is a symbol used to remember members who were victimized by the Nazis. Another symbol linked to Masonry and the occult is the double-headed eagle that can be seen on the back of the Master of Ceremonies chair at the masked ball Bill attends. Other symbols scattered throughout the film refer to the Illuminati and the occult. When Alice Harford is standing between the pillars in the first scene, the drapes on the window she is facing are fashioned into a triangle. As most know, a triangle or pyramid is a recurring Illuminati symbol. It's also no coincidence that Alice and her daughter Helena both have red hair, and the colour red features predominantly throughout the film. Red represents the Scarlet Woman, a female goddess recognised in the Illuminati and the occult. The name Helena is also significant, and possibly inspired by Aleister Crowley, an English occultist who founded the religion of Thelema, an alternative religion that is still followed today, and whose most prominent modern-day follower is a lady named Helena. Tom Cruise's character is called Dr. Bill. Some link this to money, in particular the US dollar bill, something the character in the film frequently uses to get what he wants, and possibly a reference to the industry's propensity to buy silence, as well as the Illuminati symbolism featured on the bill. The name Alice is also no coincidence. It's most likely a reference to the main character in Alice in Wonderland, a fairy tale about a privileged girl who is bored with her life and who goes through the looking glass to end up in Wonderland. In Eyes Wide Shut, Alice is often shown staring at a mirror, grooming herself, or maybe looking for something more to life. At the start of the movie, almost everyone who talks to her comments on her beauty, and it appears her daughter is also following her footsteps. The promotional images for the movie show Alice kissing Bill but looking at herself in the mirror. Many believe in these scenes Kubrick is pointing to the industry's obsession with looks and beauty. Throughout the film, there are references to rainbows, and many believe this is a nod to The Wizard of Oz, a story inspired by the book of the same name written by ardent occultist Frank Baum. It is also thought to have been the name of a programming matrix used in Project Monarch as part of the covert CIA operation known as MK Ultra, which began in 1953. The operation has also been linked to the Illuminati and is allegedly still in use today. It experimented with a trauma-based form of controlling human behaviour without the subject's knowledge. Was Kubrick trying to expose this sort of mind control in the film industry and the ultra-rich society? Possibly, as it suggested that the women prostitutes brought into the elite parties featured in the film were beta programming slaves, women who were products of mind control. This is highlighted when Bill and Alice separate at Ziegler's party and are both propositioned and actively encouraged to cheat on one another. However, Bill's flirting is interrupted when Ziegler calls him to his gigantic luxury bathroom, where he finds him getting dressed, seemingly unconcerned about the naked, unconscious woman lying on the floor next to him, who is apparently overdosed. When the woman regains consciousness, Ziegler talks to her in a strange abject manner, highlighting the fact that he's the master and she is the slave. After the incident, Ziegler urges Bill to keep everything he just saw a secret. Was this Stanley's way of saying that extreme wealth does not necessarily equal high morals and honesty? The scene is in stark contrast to when Bill and Alice first entered the party, when Ziegler and his wife welcome them, and the two outwardly decent couples talk about respectful things in a room full of enchanting fairy lights. It's very apparent throughout the film that the marriage of Bill and Alice is crumbling, but the couple put on a united and happy front when attending social events organised by Bill's wealthy clients. Is Stanley hinting at the false nature of relationships within the showbiz world? But there's more, a whole lot more. When Bill finds out his wife was tempted to cheat, he then goes on an extraordinary journey that eventually leads him to Somerton, a magnificent mansion in Long Island, where he finds a large group of masked people participating in anonymous masked intercourse with strangers in a ritual environment. Interestingly, the building used to film the outside scene of this luxurious house is Mentmore Towers in the UK. Mentmore Towers was built for a member of one of the most powerful and influential elite families in the world, the Rothschilds. By selecting this location, was Kubrick trying to expose the real-life equivalents to the ultra-elite characters in the movie, subtly warning the viewers not to be fooled by appearances and not be impressed by displays of wealth, and trying to warn the world about the occult elite and its depraved ways. Once inside the mansion, the movie takes a dark turn. Gone are the colourful lights and trappings of wealth. These are replaced by an eerie stillness and silence of creepy masks hiding the true faces and identity of the elite. The background music also dramatically changes to a song called Backwards Priests, and features a Romanian Orthodox divine liturgy played backwards. The reversal or inversion of sacred objects is typically seen in black magic and satanic rituals. Was this change in tone and backward music being played immediately before widespread fornication Stanley's way of asserting that the elite is nothing less than satanic? It's also been noted that the scene is similar to the notorious Hellfire Clubs, the name for various exclusive clubs set up in the 1700s, said to be meeting places for members of high society and political elite who wish to partake in immoral acts. Their activities were reported to include mock religious ceremonies, devil worship, and occult rituals. In short, although Stanley never actually names the secret society infiltrated by Bill, there are enough hints to know what sort of club he is referring to, and more importantly, he is telling the viewers. These societies still exist, and they are more powerful than ever. One of the beta slaves taking part in the ritual urges Bill to leave as he has infiltrated something he is not privy to. The woman turns out to be Amanda, the same woman who was passed out in Ziegler's bathroom. And when Bill does get rumbled and is asked to remove his mask by the high priest, Amanda appears again on the balcony and tells the high priest she wants to redeem him. The priest replies menacingly, "Are you sure you understand what you're taking upon yourself in doing this?" The tone seems to imply that there will be sacrifices. The next day, Bill discovers the real power of the secret society he infiltrated the previous night, when he reads a newspaper article stating that Amanda had been found dead in a hotel room due to an overdose. Reading through the newspaper, it's clear that Amanda's murder has been disguised as an overdose. This is in parallel to many real-life celebrity deaths that have been distinguished in a similar way. Another clue to this can be seen by freeze-framing and reading the news article, in which important details about Amanda's background are revealed, and it's realized it perfectly mirrors the life of several former celebrities from the entertainment industry who died prematurely in mysterious ways, most notably Marilyn Monroe. The article also reveals that Amanda had an affair with a powerful fashion designer who was wowed by her private, seductive solo performances. However, the article conveniently omits that she was a prostitute who was selling her body to the elite and being used in the occult rituals, and when she went rogue, she was eliminated by the people who controlled her life. As an add-on to this story, eagle-eyed viewers noticed that in the end credits of the film, the High Priestess, whose identity was never revealed in the film, was listed as being played by assistant director of the movie, Leon Vitali. if one carefully reads the news article about Amanda's death, Leon Vitali is the name of the London fashion designer she had an affair with. This corresponds with the unmistakable English accent the high priest had, and so it can be deducted that the high priest and Leon Vitali are one and the same, and he is the fashion designer in question. This hidden subplot is intriguing, as it seems to reveal the true nature of the fashion and entertainment industry, and how distinguished individuals in these professions are intertwined into occult secret societies. The reaction from Ziegler when he found out his so-called friend had infiltrated the masked ball shows that only a selected few are allowed to attend such rituals, and Bill was not one of them. He tells him,
"Listen, Bill, I don't think you realize what kind of trouble you were in last night. Who do you think those people were? Those were not just ordinary people there. If I told you their names, I'm not going to tell you their names, but if I did, I don't think you'd sleep so well."
Many see this as Ziegler admitting that people attending the ritual were well-known and very powerful people, and Stanley was making it clear that the richest, most powerful leaders of the real world attend these type of rituals, and they are off limits to the rank and file of those that tried to attend could face the ultimate sacrifice. In the previous films, in particular Lolita, The Shining and A Clockwork Orange, Stanley has hinted at child abuse and paedophilia in the elite and showbiz communities, and Eyes Wide Shut is no different, although in a much subtler way. For instance, after Bill returns his costume to the shop after attending the masked ball, he immediately witnesses the darker side of it all. The shop owner, who had previously been outraged when he caught his underage daughter with two Asian businessmen, has had a sudden change of heart. He now stands behind the shop counter and sells his underage daughter as if she was another product. Bill soon realizes that young girls are being sold to the elite, who are turning them into beta slaves. It is also no coincidence that the story is called Rainbow. Throughout the movie, Helena, Bill's daughter, is being brought up to be another Alice. However, there is a more disturbing aspect to her appearance in the movie that appears near the end of the film, when Helena is in a toy store with her parents. Also in the shop, standing behind the little girl, are two men who didn't really feature in the movie, but who were at Ziegler's party at the very beginning of the movie. It's theorized that these two men are part of the secret society and have been stalking Bill and his family to get close to Helena. If you watch closely, when the men walk away and disappear from the shot, Helena appears to follow them, unnoticed by her parents, who appear completely engrossed in themselves. Is this a very subtle way of saying that Helena will be sucked in by the beta slave system of the secret society? After the release of Eyes Wide Shut, it emerged that filming for both Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise had been a challenging process. Stanley was notoriously hard to work with. He was secretive and a perfectionist, and often changed the script with little or no notice. He kept pushing back the promised end date of the filming, and it overran by at least 9 months. The film still holds the record for the longest continual movie shoot. In particular, Stanley taunted Cruise, and on one occasion made him walk through a door 95 times to capture one shot. Cruise also spent long periods of time walking on a treadmill, because Stanley wanted the movie to be set in New York City, but he was too afraid to fly there, so instead the backdrops were filmed in New York City, and Cruise had to walk on a treadmill in London, with the imagery behind him. Stanley also refused to show the actor dailies of each day's filming. Watching dailies is normal standard practice during filming, so the actors can look back on their day's work and make improvements where necessary. Because Cruise was in practically every shot, it would have been vital for him to view these so he could adjust and improve his performance. In a bizarre move, Stanley was also determined to push Kidman and Cruise to examine their own relationship and draw parallels between their lives and the characters they were portraying in the movie. It's rumoured he held intense interview sessions separately with the couple, urging them not to disclose the content of their sessions with each other. This secrecy led to tensions in their own marriage. In another odd move, Stanley modelled Bill and Alice's bedroom in the movie on Cruise's and Kidman's real-life marital bedroom. He even asked the couple to sleep in the room during the shoot and move in their personal belongings, as if they were mirroring their real lives. If this wasn't strange enough, Stanley taunted Cruise further when he decided to shoot almost a week's worth of steamy and physically varied sex scenes featuring Kidman and a male model. He banned Cruise from the set during this time, and despite the duration of the shoot, in the end, Stanley used less than a minute of the shoot in the final cut. And many see this as merely an exercise to drive Cruise to jealousy and resentment. It's no surprise that at the end of 15 months of non-stop filming, Tom Cruise had a stress-induced ulcer, and less than 18 months after the film was released, Cruise and Kidman were divorced. The question is, why did Stanley go out of his way to wind up Cruise and scrutinize his marriage? Well, the answer could lie in Cruise's links to Scientology, not exactly the secret society Stanley alluded to in the film, but the one that alienated his beloved daughter, Vivian, from him and the rest of his family when she joined the movement. And by the time the filming of Eyes Wide Shut started, she was no longer speaking to them. After the loss of his daughter to the movement, many believe Eyes Wide Shut became a father's requiem for his lost daughter. And the final scene we looked at earlier that alludes to two men kidnapping Helena is in fact mirroring the fate of Stanley Kubrick's daughter when he lost her to Scientology. 4 days after screening the final cut of Eyes Wide Shut to his family, Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman and Warner Brothers executives, Kubrick unexpectedly died in his sleep. What makes his premature and unexpected death questionable is the nature and timing of it. Stanley suffered a sudden myocardial infarction, but it's worth remembering that it's relatively easy to induce a heart attack. There are chemicals, some of which are classified, that can be used to induce premature heart failure, most notably used by special agents and spies to assassinate targeted people quietly. The final cut of Eyes Wide Shut must have sent shockwaves throughout the showbiz executives who viewed it, and did it reveal too much? Was it all far too close to home? Possibly, although it does seem inconceivable that Stanley Kubrick was murdered because of a film. But there are those that believe that he was, just as other celebrities have in the past, for knowing or threatening to expose too much. Stanley was quoted as saying, "Be suspicious of people who have or crave power. Never ever go near power. Don't become friends with anyone who has real power. It's dangerous." Prior to the screening of Eyes Wide Shut, it was reported Stanley was nervous, but he refused to edit his film to please the industry. Even the title was controversial, as Eyes Wide Shut is an Illuminati term that means how most people go through life blind to what is directly in front of them in plain sight. After Stanley's death, Steven Spielberg was drafted in to complete both Eyes Wide Shut and also Stanley's film AI, and the versions that eventually aired were watered down, changed versions of Stanley's original vision. But did Stanley leave us with one last clue? He insisted that the release date for Eyes Wide Shut had to be July 16th, 1999, exactly 30 years to the day of the Apollo 11 launch. Was this another clue? And unbeknown to Stanley Kubrick, the final one?